Hi, I'm Kamil Gdula. I'm aspiring product owner with QA/test automation background.
Hi, I'm Sebastian Góral. I'm Frontend Developer, and I'm really happy I can be included here as well.
Lastly, I'm Merissa. I've been a product manager for about 15 years at this point, and I've recently worked on a project with Kamil and Sebastian.
What we would like to talk about right now is some discussion about how to implement product processes in a newly formed team. One thing that I'm really curious about is what are your perspective on how important are processes in overall software development? I mean, is there a key role or a side role for that?
As a person who's led a lot of teams across my career, I really believe in processes. I mean, I think that there's some amount of process is necessary. I think that what's really tough is finding the right balance of like how much process do you need at like a given moment in time for a team so that they can perform in a good way and feel the like safety and security that those processes bring without like suffocating creativity. So I think processes are important, but finding that balance can be super tricky.
I think very often we treat Scrum as a guideline to our processes, but from my perspective, it's all it should be. It should only be a guideline, not some very strict set of rules set in stone that are covered always and never can be changed, because that could totally have a contradict effect to the overall team wellness, well-being. What we did, the project we have all worked in, was that we started with the strict processes, but in iterations we were able to fit the best processes for our needs. And we were able to tailor them to make sure that team doesn't really feel at burden to, let's say, take place in some meetings, but instead of that we were really able to make it work to really be enjoyable.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the truth is that both of you joined the project some months after I joined. When I first arrived, the team had been working together for some number of weeks and they had some processes in place, but I think that they were still finding their way. So there wasn't too much team maturity when I joined. And wasn't super clear like who was responsible for which parts of things that needed to be done, right? Things felt a little chaotic, even though like at face value, there were some processes in place. And I think that as a product person, especially coming into a team that already exists, like this can be really tricky in the first days because a lot of product people make the mistake of like coming in too strong and like clobbering the team and taking over and being really command and control. And this like doesn't earn the trust and the respect of the team that you actually need in order to like have them do work for and with you. So for me, even in my early days in the project, I could see that things like needed some adjustments, but I spent like a sprint or 2 sprints kind of watching and observing. And this is a recommendation I have for any product person or any like leadership level role joining a new team. So like take a look. Like we all have reactions in the first moments that you join. You can see a lot of behaviors or things that are happening or things that aren't happening. So even with our project, I think by the time both of you came in, there was a fair amount of process, but it wasn't like that even just a few months earlier. We had already started that journey of trying to see, okay, like what can we put into place?
When a new product owner comes to the team, it's very tricky to implement new processes because, like, naturally from from my experience, people are very reluctant to change, right? And you don't want to make them even more reluctant, maybe even on some personal level, right? Because sometimes people cannot like differentiate between what are we doing on the team level, and they can think that you're doing it on personal level. So that's extremely tricky to find the right balance of the new processes that we try to implement to make overall team happy, right?
I think like for me personally, I don't like so much process actually. Like naturally, I'm not that like structured of a person. In order to like lead a team effectively, you like need to put some structure into place. And so for me, sometimes like to like wait for the team to say like, hey, Merissa, like maybe we should introduce this, or maybe we should introduce that, or maybe we need a meeting here or something like this, because sometimes actually like I can't tell.
Yeah.
And I think that this is something that happened with our team quite a bit, right?
Especially when we are all working in a remote environment, right?
Yeah, I had the same as Merissa said at first. I was, I don't know, kind of skeptical for the processes. Do we really need that? But with the time, it came to maturity and everything.
Seba, I think you even helped introduce some of our processes after you had been with the team for some months. Do you remember what those were?
Predemo was the first one. We started only with the front-end team, but after that, we realized all the team is really included in the demo. So this is really good example for some of the process, and it really had to be well prepared for the demo and makes it valuable as we can.
What did you do in the meeting, like when you came together for the pre-demo?
Showing what we delivered in the sprint, for example. But in pre-demo, we are showing that, and after that, say, "Hey guys, what do you think? I can improve something. Do you have any objections?" Something like that.
Yeah, and I think that this like really created a professional environment when it came time for the demo, because at least from the outside, as like the person seeing the demo, people seemed like more relaxed and confident and ready with what they wanted to show and explanations for how the work over the previous sprint had.
In the last month, we decided to shift it to the morning of the day of the demo to make sure that if something goes really, really bad, we have at least a few hours to try to figure it out. There are lots of ideas for processes, right? Like they can come really out of nowhere, but what I'd like to discuss about is how can you differentiate the good ideas from the mediocre ones? How do you know which processes are correct, non-standard processes you can implement in your team? Because I think this is the most tricky part. Pre-demo is a great example of that. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think very beginning we have to test it, give this a chance. If something will go wrong, we can just reject that. If this wasn't really important or beneficial for us, we can reject that, go to another idea.
Having a cadence like 2-week sprints in a scrum process can be super helpful, right? Because really what you're saying is, hey, let's try it for a sprint. Most people are willing to say, okay, I think this is a strange suggestion, or I don't think it's going to work, or whatever. But usually you can get people on board with something new, even a bigger change for 2 weeks. So you can use the sprint to your advantage in this way and say, hey, like, are you willing to try it for 2 weeks? And then, you already have something like a retro baked into that cycle, which means that at the end of 2 weeks, there's already an opportunity for people to say, I loved it, I hated it, let's never do this again, or actually we think it was close, like let's just improve it a little bit and keep going. I mean, I've had plenty of times where at the end of 2 weeks, people were like, really, let's never do that again. That's okay too. It's good to be in the habit of trying things. Sebastian was explaining about the pre-demo. There was like a reason that prompted that change, with small iterations, like the same way that you build products in small iterations, like your process can get better and better and really serve the team.
Do you remember some of our failed processes?
Yeah, we used Atlassian's Health Monitor framework in the first couple of goes before we switched to the regular retro. Yeah, I had like a method to that madness, actually, especially because our team had grown so significantly in the previous months and also like changed. We had totally different people in the team and we had a lot of new people. And I felt like there was a lot of topics that weren't being as openly discussed as maybe they had in the previous months. And I was really nervous that something too open-ended like a retro wasn't going to lead to a productive discussion, actually. So that's why I decided to use the Health Monitor. I know that the format was quite lengthy and involved. I know people didn't like it, but it actually like got the job done. But we did it a couple of times until we kind of like graduated from this very structured format to something like a more classical start, stop, continue retro. People were used to each other. They were used to talking about stuff, and suddenly like people were ready to have that conversation. I think if we had just jumped into that, it wouldn't have worked.
From the start, if we would go to the regular retro format, some people could be really closed or not convinced, because when people don't see something to compare to, right, they might not be as engaged. And here we had something to compare, and yeah, this health monitor really kickstarted the discussion, kickstarted the format. Previously, prior to that, we had a problem of we had nothing. We had no process of something regular retro-like, right? Okay, this kickstarted the discussion. We had 2 or 3 of those. Gradually, we decided to go to something more traditional, but I think that was the process that gave most to our team because we started discussing a lot.
So do you remember how that was? Like, how did you find it?
the format was pre-planned before we started. This is the difference between the Ditro. We have just some labels to put the tickets, and we have some areas to improve and appreciate. Every health monitor was the same topics, I think.
This structure makes it easier to say the hard things sometimes in like a client services model, right? I mean, Stepwise is a software house, which means that like you're running projects for and with clients. And I've been both on the client side and the software house. Sometimes like it can be super tricky. Part of the reason I ran the health monitor actually is because I was nervous that a lot of the things that needed to be challenged were on the client side, right? So if you create the structure for that and you create the categories to allow for that, right? Like one of the top categories in the health monitor is something like full-time owner and team leadership. And maybe if I didn't have those categories like quite openly, maybe no one from Stepwise's side would have felt comfortable to say, you guys kind of need to sort out some stuff on your side, which is like really what needed to be said and ultimately what did come out through that process.
Yeah, and I think this is one of the examples that kind of failed in our project, but I think we really improved that. What do you think, who is responsible for improving processes or making suggestions to improve them?
Half of the people would say that Scrum Master, product owner, project manager is responsible for that, because that is the intuitive answer to that question, I would say. But to be honest, this only works when everyone in the team is involved in it. So the improvements, ideas have to come from everyone, from backend developers, front-end developers, designers, QA, DevOps, everyone, to make sure, because like in the end, those are the people who are working on the project, right? We are introducing those processes, we are doing these improvements to make our life better. Only as a result of that action, like the whole project will go more smoothly, and in the end, business value will also be delivered faster.
I think it's everyone's responsibility. Honestly, I think if you're part of the team, then it's your responsibility, right? And in theory, the retro should create an environment where at least every 2 weeks, people have the chance to say, hey, this is something we could improve. And let's like specifically choose to improve this one thing as a team. Certainly someone like me or a tech lead or someone else with like a more formalized leadership function needs to steer this. And it's also our job to create an environment where everyone wants to participate. So you need like the right kind of leadership for that to work. But I think we all own those processes.
I think we had like 2 or 3 attempts to ask ourselves a question. Do we need a Scrum Master in our team? Like someone from the team proposed, maybe we need a Scrum Master to make sure that all like the processes are put in place and that we feel that it's all covered. And repeatedly we were like we don't need that, because we have everyone in team is responsible for making sure that the processes work for us.
I mean, I think that there's like plenty of other examples, like some of the teams that I was in before, like I didn't write the tickets, like in plenty of my teams that I was part of. And normally you would say, well, that's like the product owner's job, right? To write the tickets and represent the business and be the one who prescribes the requirements. But yet I worked in tons of teams where I wasn't the person that did that. Someone else did that. And so I think that like it's all about, again, like finding something that works for the team. And if the team feels like responsible and the ownership over the processes, then someone might jump in and say like, hey, maybe we need a Scrum Master, or hey, Merissa, maybe your time is better spent doing something else. I'll write the tickets for the next sprint. Or hey, I'd like to help with manual testing, right? I mean, the point is that we all sort of own the work, and part of the work is the way that we deliver.
Scrum processes, everything connected to Scrum is digital or IT related, right? Do you think it's possible to implement such Scrum-like practices in really non-digital world?
I think all teams would run better if they use something like Scrum, a customized version of Scrum for their environment. Time boxing work is a good tactic, and that's kind of what Scrum is about, right? Scrum is about like segmenting your work into like smaller chunks of work. That's a good practice for any team, right? So then you say, okay, like I think I can achieve this much in this time period, right? And people are good at understanding, okay, I think I can do X amount of work in 1 week or 2 weeks. For immature teams, like 1 week, maybe even business teams, 1 week is better, because people sort of understand like what their normal workflow looks like. And then you check in every day. That's also a great habit, right? Talk to your team members and say like, I did this, I'm going to do this. I'm blocked here. That's a great practice for any team, right? And then at the end, you show each other what you did. That's also great for like alignment and transparency and communication. And then you spend a little bit of time reflecting, thinking, how did this go? Could we improve? Like, was it okay for you? Yeah, let's try this. When you talk about it like that, sounds pretty great for any kind of team, right? Like, why wouldn't you work like that? Imagine you have sales and marketing as well, or customer success, right? That have to sort of work with the regular development team sprint cycle anyway. If the entire company is running in the same sprint cycle and they're all demoing at the same time and sharing information, that kind of transparency kind of like has a ripple effect across the entire organization.